Hey, Matty Movies here, in my recliner, ready to talk about the first movie I saw in 2019, Escape Room. Now, this movie is based on the real-life activity you can do called escape rooms, in which you go into a room, they lock you in, you have an hour to figure out how to get out, via clues they sprinkle around the room, or so I'm told. I've not done one. That's what I hear, though. The twist in this movie, of course, is that the escape room will kill you in one way or another if you don't find out how to get out. Now, of course, historically, January is the dumping ground for the worst horror movies. I'm looking at you, Bye Bye Man, from a couple years ago. Just a terrible experience. So I went in expecting just that. But I did have a little bit of intrigue going in because I like the premise. It's a basic Saw premise, and I'll get back to the Saw comparisons for sure. But they go room to room. There's something that tries to kill them in each room. They got to figure out how to get out and move on. That's the premise. And that kind of simple survival premise appeals to me. And while I can tell you with some certainty this film will win 0 awards of any kind, it's better than your average January trash. That's the best thing I can say about it. Now, usually staples of this so-called January trash I keep mentioning, there's some bad acting, terrible writing, a plot that makes no sense or is hard to follow, so on and so forth. This film didn't really have any of that. Honestly, the acting was pretty good. There's no single standout that was exceptionally bad or exceptionally good for that matter. Just kind of across the board, pretty good acting. The plot, you can follow the plot. It's not the worst I've ever seen. And the different escape rooms themselves, which was half the reason I was in the theater, there were a couple fun ones. The first and third one, that's kind of in the trailer. So the big oven room and then the upside down room. That's all I'll say. Those were pretty cool. Those were kind of fun and shot interestingly, surprisingly for a January horror movie. So I was pretty pleased with that. It's mostly good for cheap thrills. You're not going to get much depth. You're not going to leave the theater like mulling over the plot. Well, you might for reasons the filmmakers didn't intend. So it's mostly just some light, fluffy thrills, PG-13 thrills. But what more can you hope for? It's the first horror movie of the year. You're lucky to not be getting Bye Bye Man 2. So all things considered, it was pretty good. Now, as we get into the negatives, you could mention that the characters are rather dull. Standard horror fare where you don't really care if the characters survive. A lot of them are kind of dicks. They're jerks. So you don't really care too much if they survive or if they don't. That could be a negative. The plot gets a little convoluted at the end, where it's like just in, and they keep tacking on more stuff. That could be considered a negative for sure. My big beef with it is that I think it just bit off more than it could chew. And this is where I'm going to bring up the Saw comparisons I mentioned earlier. I know there are a couple horror movies that I've seen recently, actually, I'd compare this plot to, but for me, Saw is more hits closest to home. For me, and I think it's particularly the fifth Saw movie. That plot of that movie is mirrored almost identically in this one. So I'm going to use that to kind of springboard here. That movie was the fifth one in a franchise. They built up to that craziness. You start in a room with the first one. They got to figure out how to get out of that room. The second film, they're in a house. The third movie, they're in a big warehouse. The fourth one, they're going across the city. And in the fifth one, they have this escape room plot. They built up to that craziness. This one just jumped right into the deep end. Now, as I mentioned, I've never actually done an escape room, so maybe my opinion is less valid. But to my mind, if you're trying to make an effective horror movie around the premise of an escape room, you do a plot in their first movie of a probable franchise that is simple, something that people who have done escape rooms can relate to. They can say, oh man, I remember when we did that was kind of scary, and the next time they do an escape room, this movie will be in their head. No one's going to be thinking about this movie when they're doing an escape room. It's so out there. It's so much more than it needed to be for a first installment. You got giant hologram rooms where it feels like you're in the Arctic Circle. You got giant oven rooms, as I mentioned. You got a weird, trippy Dr. Seuss room and drug-induced CGI stuff. It was just nonsense. But with what we got here with Escape Room, I don't know where you go from here. You've given people top tier crazy stuff. In this shadowy figure organization, what do we care? It's the first movie in a franchise. There's no one that could be that would surprise anybody because we don't know it. We just learned these characters. It's just something you would show us like in the third movie, and then in the fourth or fifth movie you show that it's one of the characters from the original. What? Like Saul did. I just don't know where they go from here. I thought they started way too high shelf, weird, crazy stuff. They should have started simple and built, but that's a gripe. I mean, I had fun with the movie. I don't know why I'm looking out for their franchise's well-being, but I don't know. I don't know where they go from here except just to rehash the same thing with different themed rooms, much like actual escape rooms do. I guess that could keep people coming back, but my prediction, it'll spawn about 1 trillion sequels of diminishing production value, of course, which of course I welcome because that means we're going to get more into territory of so bad it's good, it's funny because it's so bad territory, and that's where I want to live with this sort of premise. But in any case, I had fun with this movie. It wasn't terrible. It was pretty good horror for January. So yeah, I'd go out and see it if that's your thing. I'd give Escape Room a soft 7 out of 10, a C minus. Not terrible, not great, pretty average. But that's about all I have to say in this discussion. So I'll just talk to you guys next time with whatever I see. Bye bye.